Right, hi everyone. I can see the numbers going up. There we go, in the corner. Participants, it's shooting up. We're going viral, which in a global pandemic is maybe not what you want to go. But yeah, I think we have people joining by the second. Yeah, welcome everyone. Should I start at, hang on, what's the actual time in the real world? 01. Should we give it a minute or two? Yes, because the number is still shooting up. Brilliant. And Philip Davis as well. Good to have you. Philip, have you sent in your letter yet? Sorry, we're not supposed to be talking about that. Oh. No, this is the serious APPG. Okay, so let's see. We've got people still joining. Hang on, someone has said in the chat, should I get going? So we're on 39 participants. I think it's stopped going up, that number. Brilliant. Well, look, can everyone hear and see me? Very pleased to have you along this Monday morning. Thanks ever so much. So this is a Happy New Year, everyone, if you can still say that. I think you can if it's the first time you see someone. And here's hoping for a good 2022. So yeah, this is the APPG for single parent families. We've always stressed the word families in the name of the group. It's not a single parent support group or anything like that, but the idea of it, Rosie Duffield, who I think is coming on, Tonya Antoniazzi, myself, and a few other people who lost their seats in 2019, had the idea that quite often when we make policy, well, there was a big, people might have seen the Sunday Times magazine yesterday, big interview with Stella Creasy talking about how parents or mothers are often forgotten. You know, it's often the man from the ministry, very well intentioned, making policy, but the mum at the school gates can fall through the cracks, and the single parent as well, be they a mum or a dad, even more so. You know, sometimes these things are seen as anomalies, you know, that it's not possible to be in this situation. So the idea of the group was to put pressure on government, and we had Mins Davis at our last meeting, who was very, very good, and has taken away some ideas. So today we're addressing the CMS, Child Maintenance Service, that was the old Child Support Agency, the CSA, and we've got a really good panel of people. We've got some really good MPs as well. Philip Davis, I remember, was at our inaugural meeting 2 parliaments ago, which means like 4 years ago or something. Stephen Timms is the chair. The Right Honourable Stephen Timms was the minister when Labour were in government, and he's chair of the DWP Select Committee. Sally Ann Hart is here also. I think we're equal number of Conservatives and Labour at the moment. But there's also a plethora of other people, the big number that keeps going up from different pressure groups and CABs from across the country. So look, I'm going to, a couple of housekeeping things. This is being recorded, so just to make you all aware. And there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, so do post any questions in there, and then we'll sort of maybe answer them in bunches at the end. And yeah, we'll see how we go for time. We've got an hour, I think. So I want to start off with Victoria Benson, who is the CEO of Gingerbread, Gingerbread are providing our secretariat, very long-standing, well-known pressure group. I think they started from the ashes of the Cathy Come Home film. We had a 50th birthday for them a couple of years back. When was that? 2017, possibly. Anyway, Victoria, do you want to start off and tell us your thoughts on the CMS? Thanks.
Hello, and thanks, Rupa. Yes, so Gingerbread works with single parent families, and in fact we started in 1918 after the First World War, and of course there were an awful lot of single parents. So I'm really pleased today to be able to speak to you about the Child Maintenance Service and how it's working, or rather isn't working, for far too many single parents. For those of you who haven't heard me speaking about this before, it won't surprise you to know that the CMS is a major issue for Gingerbread. Just under a fifth of calls to our helpline in the last year relate in some way to the CMS. And it's something which comes up time and time again in our research about financial hardships faced by single parents. Around 15% of single parent families arrange child maintenance through the CMS, equating to nearly 800,000 children. And this is a really important point and something which is quite often overlooked with child maintenance. It's about the child or the children, not the former partners. But astonishingly, on average, between a quarter and a third of paying parents are not paying any child maintenance they owe. And according to the most recent data released by the DWP, more than 90,000 children aren't receiving any maintenance at all. The cumulative arrears since the CMS was set up in 2012 now stand at more than £400 million, or approximately 9% of the total money that should have been collected. And while it's far from all parents who are cheating their children out of maintenance, it's very apparent that far too many are doing so. And how are these non-paying parents getting away with it? Well, for one, paying parents are included in the DWP figures for compliance, even if they pay only a fraction of what they owe. And there's very little transparency in the existing data collected by the DWP to illustrate the scale of underpayment. Some paying parents manipulate their income to reduce their child maintenance payments, for example, setting up a company and only paying the minimum wage, or diverting income through property portfolios and private pensions. And the onus is then on the receiving parent to report what they haven't received. And the presumption that parents should start on direct pay, the direct pay service, often allows arrears to build up before receiving parents can request the support from the CMS to chase down payments. And although the DWP does have some fairly hefty enforcement powers at its disposal, the CMS makes comparatively low use of its stronger enforcement powers, such as applying to the courts to confiscate passports or driving licenses or seeking prosecution. Put simply, there really isn't enough of a disincentive to stop many paying parents from paying none or only some of the money they owe. And there's a growing worrying trend we're seeing about how the CMS is being used by domestic abusers to perpetuate further abuse. And Nick will talk more about surviving economic abusers' perspective on this in a moment, but I wanted to briefly cover what we're finding. Domestic abuse survivors are steadily increasing in numbers as applicants to the CMS. But despite the fact that approximately 2/3 of applicants to the CMS have their fee waived due to being victims of domestic abuse, the CMS is still treating survivors as exceptions rather than the rule. At Gingerbread, we hear from many parents who feel that the patterns of coercive control that cause them to leave their partners are reenacted through the processes of the CMS. Research we published last year, along with the debt charity Step Change, uncovered that single parents who had experienced economic abuse were less likely to receive their due maintenance payments than those who haven't. So that's 24% compared to 38%. And what do we want to see change? Well, I know I've been rather critical about how the CMS is currently working, but it's important to say that we do want to keep the CMS, because otherwise parents would have no other formal option to seek payments from former partners. But it's abundantly clear that the system needs to urgently improve. In particular, we would like to see the CMS making better use of its enforcement powers. There need to be much stronger systems and resource dedicated to tackling parents who attempt to avoid or minimise child support payments and those who don't pay what has been agreed. We want to see fairer child maintenance service charges, particularly for parents receiving maintenance who are unfairly penalised for the child's other parents' unwillingness to pay. For example, we believe passionately that the 4% charge for receiving parents using the collect and pay service should be removed, as should the initial £20 charge. We want to see big improvements to customer service and case management. The CMS must improve how it communicates with parents and investigates complaints. We want to see the DWP be much more open about the data it shares with the CMS, so the system is transparent and open to scrutiny. And finally, and vitally, we want to make sure that the service is better attuned to the needs of domestic abuse survivors, who are now the majority of applicants. And I'll let Nick speak more about that now. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much. So hang on, I'm handing over to Dr. Nicola shocked, Jeff, from surviving economic abuse, former academic. What area were you in out of interest? Was it social policy or something?
It was child and women abuse, but within the context of social policy, yes.
Got you. Okay, so like myself, former academic, turned practical to actually do something about these things. Yeah, Nicola, over to you.
Thanks, Rupa. Yes, it's absolutely applied research. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about coercive control and economic abuse and how that's associated with the Child Maintenance Service and the Domestic Abuse Act now, of course, in this context, on why the issues that I'm going to talk about need to be resolved to protect single parents and their children. So I just wanted to start with a little bit of background on domestic abuse, because I think it's really relevant to how we understand this issue and how the issues are playing out within the CMS. So we're increasingly recognising, of course, that domestic abuse is commonly a pattern of coercive and controlling behaviour. So that encompasses, but is not limited to, physical abuse. It also includes sexual, psychological and economic abuse. And it's through these tactics that abusers seek to take away a victim's ability to make choices and to act freely. So contrary to popular myth, domestic abuse is not about losing control. It's very much about being in control. And an abuser feels entitled to dictate how their partner behaves. And when this control is challenged, abuse escalates. So of course, the ultimate challenge is leaving, and that's the time at which a victim is at most risk of homicide. And we know that 2 women a week are killed by a current or former partner, and a man every 3 weeks. And I think we're all aware that some of those figures have actually increased during COVID. So our own research at Surviving Economic Abuse found that 95% of cases of domestic abuse will include economic abuse. So abusers control how their partners acquire, use and maintain money and other economic resources, so things such as accommodation, food and clothing. And so through depleting these economic resources, abusers undermine their partner's ability to resist that coercive control, to leave and to access safety. Because of course, in order to leave and live independently, you need access to economic resources, the means to get away. And without them, a lot of victims and survivors stay for longer than they want to in abusive situations, and consequently will inevitably experience more harm as a result. And again, we know that women who experience economic abuse within the context of coercive control are not only at increased risk of homicide, but they're also more likely to take their own life. So it's really important to understand actually that economic safety underpins physical safety. And that's why sources of income such as child maintenance are so absolutely vital. But unfortunately, abusers do try to continue this control post-separation, because what they want to do is sabotage the victim survivor's efforts to rebuild their life independently, so that they will go back. And we see economic abuse is particularly prevalent post-separation because it doesn't require that same physical proximity in the same way that physical and sexual violence and abuse does. So we see that 1 in 4 women, again, report experiencing economic abuse post-separation. So really high levels, as Victoria indicated. So new legislation in 2021 transformed how economic abuse is understood. So the Domestic Abuse Act now includes economic abuse within the definition of domestic abuse for the first time. And this means that statutory agencies must pay regard to economic abuse within their response to domestic abuse. And Surviving Economic Abuse also successfully campaigned for the extension of the offence of controlling or coercive behaviour to include post-separation abuse. So we did this by removing the cohabitation requirement, which means you don't have to be in a relationship or living now with an abuser to continue to experience coercive control post-separation, and for that to be a criminal offence. So I think if we look at how do we create economic safety, the first thing we'll do at Surviving Economic Abuse is look to maximise a victim's access to economic resources while simultaneously seeking to reduce the control of the abuser. And many of the victim survivors we talk to only claim child maintenance because they have to. As single parents, and because they want to do what's best for their children, they recognise the potential for ongoing control by their ex-partner, and many say, you know, they wouldn't enter the system unless they absolutely had to. So one of the experts by experience that we work alongside at C told us that she was a single parent. She always does what she can for her son, that they live hand to mouth, and she struggles. And through having to claim child maintenance, her perpetrator continues to control her post-separation. And unfortunately, this is not a lone experience. So again, as Victoria said, there were 21,300 new applications to the CMS in the last quarter, and 59% of those applications made were victims of domestic abuse. So I think this really serves to illustrate to us how the needs of victims and survivors must be at the very heart of the service. Victims and survivors use it to minimise direct contact with the abuser. They trust the system to understand their safety needs, and they seek it to close down opportunities for their partner to continue to control them. But again, unfortunately, we often hear this is not the case. Staff, as well as the systems they work with, are routinely manipulated by the abuser. So, of course, understanding of economic abuse is absolutely key. And when we deliver training on economic abuse to professionals across a range of sectors, we witness how powerful that is. We see professionals immediately recognise how the policies, the processes, the procedures that they work with can facilitate economic control. And so we work together to identify how this can be overcome. So in-depth training on economic abuse is a recommendation that we've put forward as part of the current review into the Child Maintenance Service, which has been undertaken by Samantha Callan. And the case of Emma Day, which kind of led to that review that Samantha Callan's undertaking, was in a situation where an individual was murdered by her partner for claiming child maintenance. And I think, again, this serves to illustrate that all customers who report economic abuse may face threats to their life simply as a result of making an application. And as I've explained, that's because the abuser's controls is being challenged, first by separating and subsequently by applying for financial support for children, which is rightfully owed and, of course, desperately needed. But victim survivors tell surviving economic abuse that the CMS does not take them seriously when they disclose domestic abuse, and this really must change. They tell us that no inquiries are made about their safety when they disclose domestic abuse, and they're not even given the most basic of signposting to a specialist domestic abuse service. And some have even been advised to have direct contact with the abuser, which of course they're seeking to avoid through contacting the CMS, even when a non-molestation order is in place. Again, as Victoria spoke about, we hear how paying parents underdeclare their income, especially when the abuser is self-employed, and so pay less than they should, therefore facilitating economic abuse. And again, those who have evidence of the abuser lying about their income and capital report being told that any evidence that they provide will immediately be shared with the abuser. So again, this heightens their risk of harm. Payments are made irregularly of varying amounts, if at all. And I just wanted to read the following quote, which I think is really typical, but very powerful. He has repeated the same pattern for 10 years now. He lies to HMRC about his earnings, doesn't even pay the minimal amount, waits for it to reach a liability order, then waits until just before court, pays a little bit, drops the debt down again, and we repeat the same cycle. I'm still reliving the same cycle of abuse. I can still feel him having that control, which he does because the CMS has given him that control. And of course, as Victoria said, we also see this lack of enforcement, this lack of recognition, and this closing down of this continued control. And all that does is reinforce the abuser's sense of power. And for those who do receive payment via collect and pay, again, as Victoria said, we really believe the collection fee is inappropriate. Again, in the words of an expert by experience we work with, the fee for receiving parents is shocking. There is no way, because of the non-molestation order, that we can come to a private arrangement. So I'm financially being punished for having to use the service. So we would agree with all of the recommendations that Victoria has put forward. It's only through a complete review of the system and processes through the lens of economic abuse that we believe that we can maximise victim survivors' access to the economic resources they need to rebuild their lives safely, free from ongoing control.
Thanks very much, Nick. Yeah, really graphic, and the links between the economic and the sort of, yeah, emotional abuse and stuff that goes on, coercive control. And good to hear that the domestic abuse bill at least recognised that, so that's a step forward, although, yeah, there's a way to go. Next thing we've got, actually, we're going to finish up with a single parent speaker, but in between that we've got a video from Yael, L, we will call her for now, from London. Now, Henry from Gingerbread, are you there queuing this up? So this is a small, video we're going to watch next. Then we have our final speaker, then we'll open it up to Q&A, which are already gathering in the box, I can see. Thanks.
So hello, my name is Yael. I have a 5-year-old who is nearly 6. I became a single parent when my son was 10 months old. And we began first by trying to arrange finances through a family-based arrangement, and it never worked. It was a continuation of the financial manipulation I had experienced within the relationship. So in 2017, I went to the Child Maintenance Service, and that was the beginning of a very arduous, unnecessarily arduous journey. And here we are in 2022. I would preface this by saying currently the caseworker that's working on my particular case is really responsive and active and keeps me informed and explains things clearly. But this is a rare occurrence, and my case has had, I've lost track how many caseworkers have been involved. I'm probably not even aware of some of them. Very hard to keep track of. There's very little communication unless you fight for it. The Child Maintenance Service explained the steps, the various stages of kind of how you move things through. So if a family-based relationship isn't working, arrangement isn't working, then you shift to the collect and pay. I'd be on hold, and then someone would answer the phone and it would sound like I'd woken them up, and then they'd sort of explain it to me. And finally, this guy explained the collect and pay and would I like to do that? And they never took my bank details, and they never pursued it, even though I had agreed. So then I had to call back and wait on hold for another hour and then explain the case from the start again. And there was no record of the conversations had. And again, it sounds like you've woken someone up. And anyway, finally, I called to make a formal complaint at this point. And a woman on the phone in the complaints department wrote down my bank details in order to arrange this collect and pay. Meanwhile, weeks are passing by and money is not coming in. And anyway, my bank details, who knows where they are, but they were never recorded. So I had to chase that down. It's a real concern over data protection, frankly. I was feeling really uneasy at this point. It was explained to me that with the collect and pay, it was 3 strikes and you're out. Now, very quickly, he failed to pay 3 times. And rather than taking the next step, the Child Maintenance Service bought his persuasion and agreed to enable a direct debit for him. And that would take something in the area, but this was a long time ago, I'm trying to remember, I think it was about 6 weeks to establish. So it gave him another 6 weeks of not having to pay anything. All the while, I knew that that direct debit would fail because these promises were part of this financial manipulation scheme that I had been having to endure from day one. And of course, the day came for the direct debit to come out and nothing happened. Then he was allowed 3 strikes again. So all that time, months passed by before any further action was taken. I could go into detail of every kind of shift from one department to the other, but as soon as the action needed to change, the case got shifted over to a completely different department. New people picked it up. I was back at square one with the randomness of who picked up that case, whether they were going to be someone who was on it or someone who really couldn't care less or had a massive workload or every excuse under the sun. But meanwhile, I'm trying to hold down 3 jobs, give my son my very best, maintain our lives to the best of our abilities, and chase up the CMS at every step of the way. And this included numerous formal complaints. It included letters to my local MP, who received responses that were such copy and paste. I mean, it was offensive what came back from the CMS. Every step of the way, it was a phone call where I was having to sit on hold for at least an hour and re-explain the case to someone who picked up the call. And this led to a complete emotional strain. It put me in a very difficult situation because it was so difficult to get any clear communication from the CMS. So frustrating on top of the financial pressures I was already facing. And these conversations, without any choice, had to, in most instances, take place in front of my son. And that is wrong. He's also seeing his mother become completely strung out by the stress of all of this. And it got to the point where the thought of having to have another conversation with the Child Maintenance Service had such a negative emotional effect on me. You know, it's not like you put the phone down and life goes on. It would wreck the day and often week. And every single phone call, I thought, is this worth pursuing? And that's a hard question to answer when it's wrecking your life like this. When you know that you're working so hard to provide, and not just financially, but everything around that, and a government agency who's set up supposedly to support when things go awry, and that you're paying for, because when I went to the collect and pay, I'm paying for that. Frankly, if I had delivered at that quality in my work, I wouldn't have a job. I mean, I have seen some changes over the last few years. So, I mean, it did feel like my engagement with the Child Maintenance Service felt like every barrier that could have been placed in the way was placed in the way. So, for instance, when the online portal became an encouraged mode of communication, my online portal never worked. I would say that in the past 6 months and maybe 8 months, it seems like that system is now working better, but it was pretty bumpy. And I just think that for an organization the size it is, and for the cases and the nature of the cases, there's no room to have a dodgy system. You need to test that before you roll it out to the public or to the users. So communication is key. The fact that I was having to continuously re-explain my case to the next person was a huge, and is a huge, source of stress. So the handovers are supremely problematic. And furthermore, of course, we had COVID, and CMS staff were moved over to universal credits, and then that was just used as an excuse from my user point of view. And whilst I understand that we were all kind of, in a sense, democratically posed with the same challenges or similar challenges, this Child Maintenance Service seemed to kind of give up the fight a little bit. And whether, you know, people, it was chaos. So for a long while, nothing seemed to happen, and there was just this excuse of delays. Well, it's amazing how much work I achieved with a young child at home, no family support, on my own, with a loss of 48% of my income. I got all my work done, and more actually. So I sort of can't accept the excuses that I was confronted with. So for me, in terms of improvement, it's raising the game to match the game that single parents are achieving. Otherwise, it's just offensive. What am I paying for? And what, I don't know what element of tax goes into the CMS, but, you know, where's the accountability? And there just doesn't seem to be any. The only sense of accountability I've had are empty apologies. I want to see action. I want to see people doing as they said they will do. I want to see people following things up. Honestly, at this point, when I look at the account online, I cannot make head or tail of it. The figures are not explained. It's gobbledygook. You need a PhD in the Child Maintenance Service to be able to use it effectively. But I'm sorry, I'm busy doing 3 other jobs, studying as well, raising a child on my own in an expensive city, trying very hard not to depend on any resources that other people may need more. And I don't have time to do a PhD in the child maintenance service.
Brilliant. Thank you to the very rich testimony of Yael. And as we can see from the comments box, so many people are saying that that resonates with their own experience. So I think we have one last speaker for the moment, and then we're going to open it up to discussion. And that last person is our real life example. Gemma is going to talk about her experience of navigating the CMS. Gemma, are you there? Yes, you are. You're in the top middle. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so Yael's experience is very similar to mine, and in a way it's made me feel like I'm not on my own, because during the pandemic I have felt very much like I was the only person going through something as frustrating as Yael's just explained. So I became a single parent in August 2019, very unexpectedly. At the time my children were 5, 4 and just turned 1. And I had been a victim of coercive control, and unbeknown to me, my ex-partner actually racked up £40,000 worth of debt in my name also, which I've been left to pay, basically. So not only am I not getting any maintenance, I'm also having to pay debts that he's taken out in my name, and that I've really struggled to do anything about. What my ex-partner did to me and my children is one thing, but then when you turn to someone who is supposedly there to help you actually support your family financially, and they let you down repeatedly, it's beyond frustrating. So I opened my original child maintenance case in November 2019, knowing full well that without any kind of enforcement he would not pay. He wouldn't pay willingly, but like Yael was explaining, he was given 3 months to 3 chances basically to pay voluntarily, which he didn't do. Eventually, after about, I would say, 8 months, child maintenance secured a deduction of earnings order. I got 1 payment through the deductions of earnings order, and then the next month nothing came. So I rang child maintenance service. There's a deduction of earnings order. How come I haven't had a payment? Oh, well, that's strange, because we have had a payment in, but it's just pending, and for some reason it's not being allocated. That happened for 4 months until I finally found out they'd been paying all of that money to the wrong parent. So 4 months worth of payments had gone to a different parent, and I was told there was nothing they could do about that. I wouldn't be getting the money back. All they could do was offer me a conciliatory payment of £50, which I found insulting. Very similar to what Yael said. You would ring up and you would be passed from pillar to post. Every single time I rang, I had to explain my situation over and over again. And I eventually went through to make a formal complaint, and I got a very generic apology through writing on the portal, on the self-service portal, and I wasn't satisfied with that. So I took my complaint to my MP, who then tried to communicate on my behalf. Again, there was a half-hearted apology that just wasn't acceptable. So I was advised then to make a complaint to the ICE, which is what I did. Probably about 9 weeks after I made a complaint to the ICE, somebody from there contacted me, said, we've received your complaint, we just want to clarify a few things on the complaint, but we do need to tell you that it will be at least 18 months before anyone even looks at it, because there is only one independent case examiner for child maintenance service complaints, and so it'll be 18 months before they even start to look at your case. So as a single parent with 3 very young children trying to work full time, that didn't help me whatsoever. It just left me feeling even more frustrated. So I remember exactly where I was, because I'd met up with a friend and I received a call from the complaints team at CMS, and the content of the conversation was so frustrating, because I was trying to explain that I was in a coercively controlling relationship, and there was lots of things going on that I didn't know about, that I now know about, and I know that there is absolutely no way that this person will pay voluntarily. And I was told that if he hadn't hit me, it wasn't domestic abuse by somebody in the complaints team. So what happened, I'll just rewind a little bit. What happened is in the summer of 2021, I received a court order saying that he wanted to see his children. He'd not seen them from August 2019. And I was very mindful of the fact that this was a threat for me to stop claiming child maintenance. No, he didn't say that to me in so many words because I've not had contact with him, but I know that that's what the message was. So I tried to explain this to the Child Maintenance Complaints Department, and I was told if I haven't been physically hurt or threatened with physical violence, it wasn't control. So I said, I'll tell you what, you don't understand my situation. I don't feel like you have any empathy. I just want to close the case down. They closed the case down, and within 5 days, he dropped the court order to see the children. So. And I wasn't making it up. I now know instinctively how his control and manipulation works. I've since reopened the case, so I've had to make a complete fresh application. So again, he got the 3 chances to pay directly. I've now had 3 consecutive payments. They are very small payments because he's told CMS that he's only working part-time, which I know is untrue. And there's not really a lot I can do about it. I have lots of evidence that he goes by several different names. He has bank accounts in 2 different names at least. And I have evidence of this, but Child Maintenance Service said they can't receive it because it's a breach of data protection. So it just seems whichever way I turn, I'm coming up against a brick wall. He's £8,000 in arrears. And I, in total, have received £900 in child maintenance through deductions of earnings order since August 2019. Very similar to what Yael was saying, and also what Nicola was saying. I think it's really important that the Child Maintenance Service staff are trained about the kind of situation a lot of people are in who are using the service, because I wouldn't be using the service unless I was absolutely desperate. I would do anything other than use the service. But I have no choice. I cannot bring 3 children up on a single income. I need that money. I need that financial support. However, like I've explained, only having £900 in such a long period of time, I have come to the point where if I do get a payment, it's a little bit of a bonus, but I don't come to expect it at all anymore. And I've ceased to try and speak with anyone at the Child Maintenance Service. I use the self-service portal, but the frustration and the stress of having to speak to the people on the phone is just far outweighs any benefit that you get from it. And the other thing is, once your complaint has gone to the ICE, your case gets moved to a completely different department in the Child Maintenance Service, and they don't receive incoming calls. So if you do ring, you can't speak to anyone anyway, and you have to wait for a call back. And the other thing I was telling Henry about Gingerbread, one of the things that really, really used to cause me sleepless nights was you'd often get an email on a Saturday evening between 9 and 10 p.m. And that email would be the one telling you that we were expecting a payment, it hasn't come. But obviously, you cannot then contact Child Maintenance Service till a Monday morning. So on a Saturday night, as a single mum at home with 3 children in bed, wondering how I'm going to pay my bills, you get an email like that on a Saturday evening. It's an automated email, but my question is, why does it have to go out on a Saturday night? Why doesn't it go out on a Monday morning when you can then use the service to actually speak to someone about what the next step will be? So yeah, I'm sorry if that was a bit jumbled up, but it's just been such a long, ongoing saga. And I won't shut this case down now. I'm determined not to shut it down, but I've had to kind of remove any emotion or hope, really, that I'll ever get what the children are owed. But I owe it to them to keep it open and keep it running. And that's why I felt it was important for me to speak today. Not just for myself and my own children, but for obviously the thousands of other people that are experiencing this absolutely appalling customer service from the CMS.
Thanks so much, Gemma, for sharing that. And thank you to everyone that's been courageous to hear Yael's testimony, and then the sort of dispassionate academic analysis of Nicola and Victoria as well. Can I ask, first of all, the MP, Stephen Timms, is your committee thinking of doing an inquiry into this? I think there was a government review, wasn't there?
Thank you, Rupa, and thanks for the very interesting contributions that we've had. We will be looking at this in the course of this year. We're doing a series of inquiries at the moment around the topic of children in poverty. We've got the ministers coming to speak to us on Wednesday this week about children in families with no recourse to public funds. But later on, we are expecting to have some look at the implications of what the Child Maintenance Service is doing. And so this is a very helpful briefing for that.
Thank you. And no recourse to public funds, that's people whose immigration status doesn't allow them to. In fact, Boris Johnson, I remember very vividly, when Stephen Timms asked this question, he'd never heard of it, which really surprised me, because as a London MP, presumably, I don't know, maybe he's got other fish to fry, certainly at the moment. Who else? Yeah, Sally Ann and Philip Davis. Has this come across your post bag at all? I mean, some of these things are pretty generic, just administration that feels, computer says no, but I mean, when there's children's lives at stake. Yeah, Sally Ann, go on.
Yes, I would absolutely say this resonates very clearly with me and some of the problems that my constituents have faced. I have to say, Baroness Steadman-Scott, who is the Minister for this area, is absolutely passionate about making absent parents pay, and they are invariably men, I have to say that, fathers. And just because your relationship breaks down doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't continue the responsibility to your children, including financial responsibility. And I have written several letters directly to the Minister, Baroness Steadman-Scott, on behalf of constituents, and she's taken it up directly, and it's been very helpful. So I know one of the questions in the question and answer session was saying a woman there has had issues, and I've recommended that she writes to her MP to directly correspond with the minister involved, because I found that very helpful. I think there have been great changes, and certainly since the minister took over, she gives quarterly sessions with MPs, and that's with all cross-party MPs. It's really worth going to go to one of those sessions, because we discuss all these things, the abuse, etc. And she's passionate about this, about collecting money, because as far as she's concerned, it's about preventing child poverty, and it's a very important backstop against child poverty, and it's there to step in. Child Maintenance Services is there to step in for a parent who tries to dodge their financial responsibility. So definitely it is something that she's passionate about, and I think the more support as MPs we can give her with feeding in the information that our constituents are having with the Child Maintenance Service is better, if we all sort of feed that into her. Thank you, Rupa.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, maybe we should get her along to sort of hear these coalface experience. Oh, what's happened to the camera? Hang on. Oh yeah, there. I didn't switch anything off. Yeah, and also I think another issue is people who have paid consultancy, that doesn't show up. So if you're on a daily rate, that's not a regular. I think both Gemma and Yael were explaining that there are ways around this. People who've changed name and had several bank accounts, this kind of thing. I think it is very sort of rigid, the way it works. If any of the other MPs want to chip in, they can, or I can go to the ones in the chat box. Philip, Rupa, you look like you're, yeah,
Rupa, I was just, I mean, again, everything we've heard very much rings true with what I hear, particularly about people sort of masking their income and finding ways to try and make it as difficult as possible. I think, and I'm really pleased Stephen's on the line as well, to be honest, because I think it's really important that the select committee tries to do what it can to get to grips with this, because it is really important. And one of the things that I find frustrating is that, and I'm sure, you know, which sort of reinforces some of the points that were made, is that the CMS sort of have a policy of, you know, oh well, if it's difficult, they sort of write it off. They file things under sort of too difficult to pursue, which sort of encourages people to try and make it complicated and mask things and whatever. Because they know pretty much that if they make it hard enough, the CMS will just give in. And I sometimes get the impression with the CMS, they just go after sort of the easy cases, which actually are probably the ones that don't need pursuing so much, because they probably would sort themselves out. And the ones where people really need support and really need help, the CMS sort of just write them off as being too difficult and move on to something easier. And I just think that, what I'd like to see the CMS do is actually pursue some of these cases more vigorously, where people are gaming the system, knowing they're partly gaming the system because they know the CMS won't be persistent in pursuing them. And I think we've got to change that culture at the CMS.
Yeah, so maybe it needs more teeth to be able to do something, because it just seems, I mean, supposedly they can deduct it at source, but I mean, the figures we've heard, the mismatch between what people are owed and what actually is forthcoming is alarming.
Can I just say, I think one of the issues you see is that I think the CMS and its predecessor organisation, which obviously, the Child Support Agency, which was in effect sort of disbanded because it was so hopelessly inefficient. Nothing's really changed. I mean, apart from the name on the tin, everything that was wrong with the CSA is wrong with the CMS. And I think one of the issues is, and again, I think this might be where Stephen's committee can be helpful. I always got the impression that one of the things they were slightly embarrassed about, and I don't know if this is still the case or not, and you, Rupa and Stephen, will know better than me, but one of the things that they always embarrassed about was that the cost of the Child Support Agency, as it was then, was actually higher than the money they were getting in for parents. It was, actually it might not have been fairer, but it would have been cheaper for them, literally, for the state just to hand the money out themselves. It would have actually been cheaper than the bureaucracy of the Child Support Agency. And they were always embarrassed about that, with good reason, I guess. And therefore, you see, that makes them more reluctant to go after complicated cases, because the cost of pursuing them against how much they might get in makes that sort of makes the cost versus the receipts a more difficult equation, and in effect gives them an incentive to go after the easier cases that perhaps don't need pursuing. And so I think actually encouraging them to actually tackle some of these cases where people are deliberately making things difficult and blowing smoke in their face, I think we need to give them a bit of cover in order to do that, and say that they shouldn't be embarrassed about doing that. It is a worthwhile thing, and because I do think they've shied away from it for that sort of political reason. Yeah, I mean,
I was just going to say, Rupa, that the thing that been said this morning that shocked me the most was the parent who said that the payments had been made to the wrong person, and then the agency said, well, sorry, it's too late, you can't have it. I mean, that seems to me completely indefensible. So that's one thing I'd definitely like to pursue, along with some of the other points. And I think Philip's point about the costs, we need to find out what the latest is on that as well. I apologise, I have to leave the call, but it's been very interesting and useful. Thank you.
Sorry, while everyone's here, can we have a quick, everyone turns on their camera and we do could we do that? Peter and Rosie, if you're still there. Peter, what's he? Oh, he's doing something else. Never mind, look, I'm going to take, with your consent, everyone, smile. Although it's a sad topic. Thank you. Okay, your excuse, Stephen, thanks so much for your input, and looking forward to see what comes of it. Thanks. So Gemma, I think that was you who said it was the wrong parent. Does that mean it was paid to the non-resident parent? That's what I wasn't clear. And also, sorry, what does ICE stand for? If you can just
independent complaints examiner.
Aha, right.
That's who. Well, I actually got the advice from Gingerbread to, once if I wasn't satisfied with the complaints procedure, what they came up with as their reasons for mishandling my case. If I wasn't satisfied with their response, then the next thing to escalate it to was the ICE. But yeah, so my ex-husband had another child from a previous relationship who's now an adult, working adult, and he had mounted up arrears since leaving me in the August 2019, and they'd paid the maintenance that was meant for me to his mum for 4 months in a row.
That is just shocking. And then there's no way of that coming back because he's such a serial bounder that there's women everywhere. Rosie, you look like you were going to say something, or did I imagine it?
I mean, you know, I've had my own personal experiences that are completely similar to what we've heard from Yael and Gemma. Never, ever did any of the mistakes that I experienced get paid back to me, apologised for, or anything like that. You are literally left with no money coming in that you budget for and you expect, and you know what's coming out. If you're a single parent dependent on tax credits and child maintenance payments, you make your budget fit these bits of money that come in every fortnight roughly, and if that money just suddenly doesn't appear, you can't, you know, there's no money behind the sofa to pay these bills, and they don't care. And when you are desperate, you do not want to tell your story 300 times to a load of strangers, you know, who don't care, who don't pretend to care. And then at the end of the conversations I used to have, they mostly would tell me they didn't understand how the calculations were wrong. They couldn't understand it either. And some of them are very nice, but they literally didn't understand what format had been applied to kind of come up with these figures. So the stress of doing it was almost worse than the stress of having to borrow money from friends and family, actually, in my experience. And I've only just this second, about a month ago, ended my relationship with the CMS, and thank God, you know, because my children are now old enough, but it is horrendous, not fit for purpose. And this is a public body that's paid for by the taxpayer. And one day I might be honest about my own experiences in a book or something, but I can't talk about it publicly. And it's horrendous. They are horrendous and rude and unpleasant and defensive. And yeah, I mean, everything they've said is, and we all have constituents who have exactly the same experience as well. So, you know, but some of us, a few of us in Parliament, know exactly what it's like in real life. So I'm sorry you both have had this, because it is awful.
Yeah, thanks. Sally Ann's got her hand up. Also, there's a few questions in that box. Does anyone know the answer? Some of them are a bit technical. Is there an amount when the CMS writes things off? Certain things. So look, if any of our panelists are experts, Victoria, Nicola, who's done the academic research, can answer, and you can read those quicker than I can read those out. The issue of non-resident parent, and then I think there's nights deducted for the nights that they stay with that non-resident parent, which again is depressingly familiar. Gemma, the thing you were describing, suddenly he wanted the kids back. That was obviously, sounds like a bit of a calculation.
Oh yeah, he didn't want to see the children. He just wanted to scare me off. Did he get the wrong
kids from the wrong wife?
Well, yeah. He just wanted to scare me off pursuing the child maintenance case. That's it, and he proved that by, you know, he tried to shut down the his case to see the children as soon as I dropped the child maintenance case, but unfortunately it was too late. Anyway, I've just secured the week before Christmas a non-contact order, so he can't see them. But yeah, he never intended to see them.
Because again, it's his own kids he's punishing. Sally Ann, did you want to chuck something in your hands up? I think you're on mute.
Trying to get my thing, yes. If I remember last year, and I think summertime, there was a consultation launched on the child maintenance service, and I don't know what the outcome of the information that was gathered for that. Maybe Gingerbread might have an idea.
Yeah, let's get back to Gingerbread and to Nicola, Dr. Nicola. Yeah, if you can also address the things in the chat as well. And the national,
sorry, just to say, the National Audit Office is doing a review of the CMS, and we're expecting that their findings fairly soon. You know, we don't, obviously they're looking at value for money and stuff like that, so that will be really interesting. I'll just before we answer the questions, just to say, I mean, thank you, Gemma, for speaking. I know it's really hard, really tough. I mean, Gemma's and Yael's stories are really, really common. You know, just in terms of the money side of it, leaving the abuse side separate, I think the key is that many non-resident parents forget that they are paying for their children, and they look at it as they're paying their ex, and it's a tool to be used, a negotiating tool. And all too often they forget that the resident parent needs this money to feed their children. It isn't a luxury for them. And just on the point of poverty, we know that if those children in poverty received their child maintenance payments, it would lift 60% of them out of poverty. So, you know, it's a really important from a child poverty perspective that the CMS works. And you know, the other point, the CMS has enforcement powers, but it just doesn't use them. It's got really good set of enforcement powers. So we know, for example, it has the power to take away passports. Well, last year it didn't take away any passports. So all too often it looks very, you know, to the resident parent, it just looks desperate, but to the non-resident parent, it's kind of, it has no teeth in it, and it doesn't really encourage them to pay. And on the cost point, I'll shut up in a second. We know that one of the reasons the CMS prefers direct pay, the direct pay service rather than collect pay, is that it's cheaper. But of course, direct pay doesn't work for many single parents who are in fact using the CMS as an absolute last resort. And you know, just the point that a person who isn't receiving any money because their X isn't paying it has to pay in order to get the best service from the CMS. It's just, you know, it's just awful. Why should you have to pay because your X isn't paying the maintenance? And I'll let Nick talk about abuse, but just to say, you know, I heard from somebody really recently that similar stories about her ex-partner who was abusive. She said she had to repeat the story so many times to the CMS and the different customer services teams that, you know, it was like reliving that trauma every single time, and they didn't seem to have a clue of how to treat her and how to make things easy for her. And it was like PTSD every time she had to retell her story. So yeah, it's terrible. Nick.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, and it came through so starkly in Gemma's story, and thanks so much for sharing, Gemma. But I think, you know, for us, you know, we're seeing some sectors, you know, do this really well. The financial services sector, for example, now has a code of practice around responding to financial abuse, and a number of principles set forward in how they respond to victims and survivors, you know, and certainly only having to tell your story once is one of those things. So, you know, the customer services team of a large bank or building society now, you know, is doing a lot better in this space in terms of customer service, understanding the issues, making sure that there are principles in terms of responding, holding the perpetrator accountable. You know, now we've seen some terms and conditions change with some joint accounts where, you know, one party will be removed without their consent where they're being seen to control another party, you know, through a joint financial product. You know, this stuff can be done, and I think there's a huge amount that could be learned from the private sector actually in this space, you know, which is actually where we expect the good practice to be. You know, it's kind of almost round the wrong way. So, you know, I just want to say, you know, there's so much scope and potential for how things could change, and some great models and some great practice which we could potentially learn from.
Well, look, maybe we should do a sort of joint letter on APPG headed paper with Sir Peter from the House, we've also had here as well, and all the MPs that were here today, the other people that couldn't make it, and maybe a list of demands. Because if there are models from the financial services sector and they're seen as very cold and calculating, if they're able to get it right there, there's things, readovers, best practice and things that could be shared. And we could send that to Baroness Steadman-Scott and maybe invite her to a future one of these, the other side of when that NAO report comes out. What do you think? Sorry, we should be democratic. I shouldn't be steamrollering, but maybe a joint letter in writing some of those points of things that, you know, there should, this lack of continuity, the humiliation people go through every time, just certain things that, you know, maybe better note keeping. If it was, usually they can summon up your thing on your case when you ring up an organisation like this. And the COVID thing, you'd have thought, I mean, I think I was phoning the NatWest Bank for something completely different, and the recorded line said that our staff are working from home. If there are children in the background, please do bear with us. I mean, that should make people more children empathetic, and especially the CMS is dealing with these things. If they're sort of being cold fish, then that is not good. And especially if they're phoning, what was it? If they send the emails Saturday night, then that mucks up your weekend and you can't sleep. But just little things they could fix to make it more smooth. So hang on, Henry, you're in the bottom right corner of me. Henry from Gingerbread. Are you allowed to turn your camera on? No? I think Henry's been minuting and noting everything that goes on. Maybe we can distribute around everyone who's been here today. And Stephen Timms is here as well. and we can turn this into a letter to get some action rather than just being an hour of us having a mutual moan.
The other thing, Rupa, is that in that letter, I agree with what you're proposing. I think the other thing to make clear is that in Gemma's case, which I was shocked by too, that if the CMS make a mistake, as they did in Gemma's case, that people should be compensated in full, not a derisory payment. I mean, well, they should, that seems to me a pretty basic thing that would be expected of any organisation in the country. To be perfectly honest, I'm flabbergasted that doesn't happen now. But if it doesn't happen, then that's something that really must happen as a matter of urgency. And I'd be shocked if the Ombudsman didn't say that they should have to do that as well. To be perfectly frank.
Yeah, that is completely shocking when you said the wrong parent. I mean, that's not like a Wallace and Gromit film, the wrong trousers. That's pretty serious maladministration going on. Okay, well, look, let's put all these. Hang on, is there a way of capturing the chat? Because this will vanish, or I can screen grab it, I suppose. Because there are a lot of specific questions about non-resident parents and powers. Okay, maybe the chat will be saved. Hurrah! Okay, the chat will be saved. Phew. Okay, brilliant. Well, look, thanks everyone. I think we've come to the end of our time. Late night ahead, I think, for us MPs. I think 10 o'clock votes or something, I've been told, unless you know any better than me. That's what they said last week, elections bill. But look, thank you. It's been a really immersive, interesting experience to get into the heads of, what's going on and what needs fixing here. And we will turn this into a letter, distribute it around everyone who's been here today, and see if we can get some action out of it. Thank you ever so much. Thanks.